My name is Caden Hill, and as a trucker, I thought I'd seen it all. From the long stretches of empty highways to the eerie backroads, I thought I knew what to expect, but I wasn't ready for what happened on my last run. When I drove through checkpoint 27, it all started as a normal delivery. I had a cargo of medical supplies to drop off at a remote facility just outside Salt Lake City. It was an overnight drive, nothing out of the ordinary. The roads were clear, the weather was good, but as I neared the checkpoint, I noticed something strange. There was no sign of life. This checkpoint was notorious for being a security hub, usually bustling with military vehicles and patrols. But there were no cars, no guards, nothing. Just a faded, barely legible sign reading, Checkpoint 27, proceed with caution. I slowed down, checking my watch. It was already late, and the last thing I wanted was to get stuck. But something told me that I needed to stop. I pulled over and climbed out, the night air biting at my skin. That's when I saw them. A group of soldiers standing in a tight formation near the gate, their faces hidden in shadow, the air around them thick with an unnatural chill. They didn't move, didn't speak. They just stood there, perfectly still, as if waiting for something. I hesitated, but I needed to get through. I approached them cautiously, asking, "Is everything all right? I've got a delivery." One of the soldiers finally turned to face me, his eyes hollow and lifeless. He gave a slight nod, then turned back to the others. The entire group remained silent. I moved past them, driving the truck through the gate. But as soon as I crossed the threshold, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. The atmosphere changed instantly. The air grew heavier, the temperature dropped. My headlights flickered. I looked in my rearview mirror, and the soldiers were still there, standing at attention. But now, their faces were distorted, like masks that didn't quite fit. I blinked, and they were gone. I pressed on, trying to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The road ahead stretched endlessly, winding through thick forests and barren fields. I glanced at the GPS and froze. There was no route. The screen was completely blank, and when I looked up, I realized I wasn't driving on any map. I recognized the checkpoint was no longer visible. The road seemed to stretch on forever, with no signs, no landmarks, just endless darkness. I didn't stop, didn't even think. I floored the gas pedal, trying to escape whatever this place was. But no matter how fast I went, the road kept going. Finally, I saw another checkpoint ahead, a much older, more dilapidated version of the first one. I could barely make out the sign, Checkpoint 28. I pulled up to it, desperate for any kind of answer. A man stepped out from the shadows. He was older, his face weathered and worn, and his eyes glinted with something like sadness. "You shouldn't have come here," he said quietly, his voice rough, like it hadn't been used in years. "What is this place?" I demanded. "Where am I?" The man didn't answer. He just pointed to the road behind me. I turned, and the checkpoint was gone. The road was empty, as if it had never existed. I don't know how I got out of there, but I eventually found my way back to a normal highway. The sun was rising, and everything felt like a dream. But I'll never forget the faces of those soldiers, and the endless, empty road that led me to nowhere now. Every time I drive at night, I always check the signs. But I know now, some roads aren't meant to be driven. Some checkpoints aren't meant to be passed. My name is Travis Black, and I've seen things on the road that would make most people question their sanity. But nothing compares to the night I hauled the silent cargo. It was late, about 2 a.m., when I got the call. The dispatcher said they needed a driver for a special delivery, a load from a warehouse just outside of Las Vegas. I'd been on the road for a while, and I didn't mind the idea of a quick, high-paying job. The load was strange, though. No real details, just the address and a vague instruction to get it there fast. When I arrived, the warehouse was almost deserted, save for a single security guard who barely looked up as I pulled in. The trailer was already hooked up, waiting for me. It had a sealed container with no labeling, no markings. I thought it was odd, but I didn't care much. I took the job, hooked up the rig, and started driving. The further I got, the more uncomfortable I felt. There was a strange, unnerving quiet around me. No other trucks on the road, no signs of life. Then, about 4 hours in, I began to hear it. A faint scraping sound from the back of the trailer, like something was moving inside. I checked the rearview mirror. The trailer was still behind me, perfectly still, but the sound continued, louder now. A soft, rhythmic scrapes, something shifting, sliding against the walls. I pulled over, heart racing. I was alone on the highway, the night air cool and still. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed into the back of the trailer. What I found was empty. No cargo. Just the bare, cold metal floor of the trailer. I checked the locks, made sure everything was sealed. But when I stepped back into the cab and started driving again, I heard it, that scraping sound, and then it changed. It wasn't scraping anymore. It was a soft, tapping noise, like fingers drumming on a surface. I started sweating. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was in the trailer with me. I reached for the radio, but the static was deafening. I drove faster, the tapping growing louder, faster, until it felt like the sound was inside the truck, right next to me. I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled into the nearest truck stop, leaving the rig running. I ran inside, told the cashier what had been happening, but when I went back to check the trailer, there was nothing. The tapping had stopped. The trailer was still empty. I didn't feel any better. I finished the delivery, but I never found out what was in that trailer. I'm not sure I want to know. The weird part, the warehouse was empty when I went back to drop the keys. The place didn't exist anymore. My name is Jace Winters, and I've driven more miles than I care to count. You learn a lot about people when you're on the road alone for hours on end, but I've never seen anything quite like the night I ended up on the endless highway. It started like any other long haul. I picked up a load in Phoenix, heading to Albuquerque. The skies were clear, and the sun was just setting, casting an orange glow over the desert. But as I cruised along the highway, I noticed something strange. There was no exit sign, no mile markers. At first, I thought I was just in the middle of nowhere, but after a while, I realized something was off. No other cars, not a single truck, not a single vehicle on the road. It was just me and the road stretching on for miles. I checked my GPS, nothing. It wasn't working. I pulled over to the side of the road, grabbed my phone. No signal. I was starting to feel uneasy. I'd been driving for hours, and the road didn't seem to end. I pushed on. As the night wore on, I noticed the lights on my dashboard flickering. I chalked it up to a glitch until I realized the road signs had started repeating. First, it was the miles to Albuquerque sign, then the speed limit sign, and then the same truck stop appeared in my rearview mirror, exactly as it had been when I passed it hours ago. I slammed on the brakes. I turned the wheel, trying to shake the feeling that I was trapped in some sort of loop. But there it was again. The same stretch of highway, the same truck stop. No matter how many turns I made, no matter how many times I tried to reset my course, I ended up right back where I started. And that's when I saw it in the distance. Up ahead, the headlights of another truck. Relief flooded through me. I wasn't alone anymore. But as I got closer, I saw the truck was abandoned. The engine was running. The doors were wide open, but there was no one inside. I pulled over, my hands trembling. I stepped out and approached the truck, heart pounding, and then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure sitting in the driver's seat. But it wasn't a person. It was just a shadow, black and shifting, as if it were made of smoke. I turned and ran back to my rig. I drove 4 hours faster, harder, until I finally saw an exit sign. I took it, but when I stopped at a gas station to catch my breath, I checked the map. There was no exit, there was no road, and there was no highway, only the endless stretch of empty, desolate land where the highway had been. I haven't been able to find that road again, but every now and then, late at night, I see headlights in my rearview mirror, and I wonder, am I still on that highway? My name is Ethan Grady, and I've been a trucker long enough to know the road has rules. Some are written, some aren't. One of those unwritten rules: never pick up hitchhikers. I broke that rule once. It was a foggy night on Route 89, a lonely stretch of highway cutting through the mountains. The kind of road where you can go hours without seeing another soul. I had been driving for nearly 10 hours straight when I saw him, a man, standing at the side of the road, his thumb out. Something about him was off. His clothes were too clean, like he hadn't actually been walking anywhere. His posture was stiff, unnatural, and though it was freezing outside, he wasn't shivering. I should have kept driving, but for some reason, maybe exhaustion, maybe curiosity, pulled over. He climbed in without a word, just nodded at me, his face partly hidden by the shadows in the cab. I tried to make small talk. "Where you headed?" No answer. I glanced at him. His face was expressionless, his eyes locked on the road ahead. "You got a name?" Silence. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The air inside the truck had turned ice cold. Then, finally, he spoke. "You should drive faster." His voice was low, almost a whisper. A deep, gut-level fear twisted inside me. I pressed the gas. The CB radio crackled. A voice, an unfamiliar trucker, came through. "You need to pull over. Right now." I glanced at my mirrors, and that's when I saw it. The reflection. The man wasn't sitting in the passenger seat. He was in the back of the cab, grinning. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop, my heart pounding. When I turned, the seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. There were no footprints outside, but the radio crackled again. "You saw him, didn't you?" I swallowed hard. Who the hell was that? A long pause. "Then they call him the wrong passenger. He only shows up on foggy nights, and if you don't get rid of him fast enough, ... The voice trailed off. I didn't ask what happened if you didn't get rid of him fast enough. I never take Route 89 anymore, and I never stopped for hit. My name is Logan Tate, and I've been a trucker for over a decade. I've driven through all kinds of weather, across every kind of road, but nothing has ever shaken me like the night I hauled a load that didn't exist. It was a midnight run, one of those last-minute jobs that paid well if you didn't ask too many questions. The dispatcher gave me a pickup location, an old, nearly abandoned warehouse outside of Tucson. No paperwork, no questions. Just load up and drive. When I got there, the place was silent. No workers, no forklifts, just a single trailer, sitting in the dark. The bill of lading was blank. I hesitated but hooked it up anyway. Money was money. As soon as I pulled onto the highway, something felt wrong. The truck was heavy, way heavier than it should have been. My rig groaned under the weight, and I could feel the strain in the steering. I flipped on the CB radio to keep myself awake, but all I got was static. Then, about an hour in, the trailer shifted hard, like something inside moved. I checked my mirrors. The trailer doors were latched shut, but then, bang, a massive thud from the cargo hold, like something big slammed against the walls. My pulse skyrocketed. I pulled over, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out into the cold, desert air. The trailer looked normal, no signs of damage. Then I noticed something. The air was dead silent. No wind, no crickets, not even the hum of the truck's engine, just Silence. I reached for the latch and the trailer door burst outward, as if something inside had just kicked it from within. I stumbled back, heart hammering. But the doors were still locked. I was losing it. I climbed back into the cab and took off, deciding I'd just dump the load at the first truck stop and call it quits. That's when my GPS started glitching. The screen flickered, the map spinning wildly before settling on something impossible, a road that didn't exist, and the ETA 0 o'clock. I slammed the brakes. My headlights illuminated something in the road ahead. A truck, or what was left of one, burned out, rusted, and destroyed, like it had been sitting there for decades. And yet, it was the same model as mine, same markings, same trailer. Then my CB crackled to life. A voice, distorted and barely audible, whispered, "Turn back." I floored it, in reverse, my mind screaming at me to wake up from whatever nightmare this was. And then silence again. The wreck was gone. The GPS was normal. The trailer felt light, as if whatever had been inside had just vanished. I made it to the next stop and ditched that load, left the trailer in the lot, and never looked back. When I told the dispatcher, he just looked at me funny. "We never gave you that job, Logan," he said. "I quit trucking for a year after that, but sometimes, late at night, I hear something knocking from inside my new trailer." My name is Tommy Briggs, and I've been a truck driver for nearly 20 years. I've seen all kinds of strange things on the road, but nothing like what happened to me last winter on Highway 6. It was a bitterly cold night, and the roads were nearly empty. I had a long haul ahead of me, hauling lumber up to a construction site in Idaho. The sky was pitch black, and the only sounds were the hum of my engine and the occasional crackle of my CB radio. Around 2 a.m., I reached a stretch of road known as Dead Man's Curve, a sharp bend carved into the side of a steep ravine. Every trucker knew about it. It had claimed more than a few lives over the years. As I slowed down to navigate the turn, I saw something ahead, a truck overturned in the ditch. Its trailer was half crushed, its cab twisted like a broken toy. The hazard lights were still blinking. I pulled over, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out into the freezing air. "Hello," I called. No answer. I moved closer. The truck's driver's side door was wide open. No sign of the driver. And then I saw the footprints in the snow. They led away from the wreck, but stopped abruptly, about 20 feet out, as if the person had just vanished into thin air. A cold wave of fear rolled over me. I turned back toward my truck and froze. There was someone sitting in my cab, a shadowy figure in the driver's seat, barely visible through the windshield. I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't left the door open. I took a shaky step forward. The figure didn't move, just sat there, staring straight ahead. My breath came in short gasps as I climbed back into the cab, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The seat was empty, but the radio, the damn CB radio, crackled to life. A distorted voice whispered, "You should have kept driving." The air turned ice cold. My fingers felt numb as I fumbled for the ignition. The truck roared to life, and I peeled out of there, tires skidding on the frost-covered road. I didn't look back, not until I was miles away, heart still hammering against my ribs. The next morning, I stopped at a diner and asked an old-timer about the wreck. His face went pale. "Son," he said, "that wreck's been there for nearly 20 years. Driver never made it out. Some folks say he still hitches rides with passing truckers. I don't take Dead Man's Curve anymore, and if you ever drive that way at night, keep going." My name is Caleb Mercer, and I've been a trucker long enough to know when something isn't right. I've seen accidents, near misses, and strange sights on the road, but nothing prepared me for what I saw en route for one dot. It was a stormy night, and the rain was coming down in sheets, turning the road into a slick, black river. My wipers struggled to keep up as I navigated through the darkness. I was alone on the highway, just me, my rig, and the sound of the rain hammering against my windshield. Then, in the glow of my headlights, I saw her, a woman, standing at the edge of the road. She was soaking wet, her long dark hair plastered to her face. She wore a white dress that clung to her thin frame, and she was barefoot, her pale feet sinking into the mud. I slowed down, my heart pounding. She raised her hand in a weak wave, eyes wide and desperate. I hesitated. I never pick up hitchhikers, not in the middle of the night during a storm. But something about her. She looked helpless. I pulled over. She moved slowly, almost reluctantly, as she climbed into the passenger seat. Her skin was freezing cold, and the air inside the cab suddenly felt damp, like the storm had followed her in. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Where you headed?" She didn't answer at first, just stared straight ahead, water dripping from her dress onto the seat. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "I just want to go home." A chill ran down my spine. "Where's home?" I asked. She turned her head slowly, finally looking at me. Her eyes were completely black. I slammed on the brakes. She didn't react, just kept staring at me with those empty, bottomless pits where her eyes should have been. And then she smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched her face in a way that wasn't human. I blinked, and she was gone. The seat was dry, no water, no footprints, just emptiness. My hands were shaking as I checked my mirrors. Nothing, just the rain pounding against the asphalt. I floored it, driving faster than I ever had before. The next morning, at a truck stop, I told an old-timer about the woman. His face turned pale. "You saw her," he whispered. "Who?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "They call her the drowned woman. Died in a wreck on Route 41 years ago. Every time someone stops for her," he hesitated, "they say she comes back with them. I haven't driven that route since Dot, and every night, when I check my mirrors, I swear I see her standing in the dark waiting." My name is Eddie Grayson, and I've been a trucker for 13 years. I've spent countless nights on the road, stopping at grimy diners and half-abandoned rest stops. But there's one place I'll never stop at again. It was a foggy night on Interstate 80. I had been driving for nearly 12 hours, my eyes burning from exhaustion. I needed to rest, but I was still miles away from my usual stop. Then, through the mist, I saw a sign for a rest area, one I didn't remember seeing before. I pulled in. The place was empty. No cars, no other trucks, just a few dim streetlights, flickering against the thick fog. The restroom building stood a few yards away, its doors slightly ajar. I decided to use the facilities before catching a few hours of sleep. As I stepped inside, a chill ran through me. The air was stale and damp, carrying the faint smell of mildew and something metallic. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow. I chose the first stall and locked the door. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the far end of the restroom. I froze, barely breathing. The sound stopped just outside my stall. I glanced down. No feet, no shadow, nothing. The silence was suffocating. Then, from the other side of the door, a whisper. "Why did you stop here?" My blood turned to ice. I didn't answer. I didn't move. The stall door rattled violently, shaking on its hinges. I jumped back, my heart slamming against my ribs. And then silence. I hesitated before slowly unlocking the door. The restroom was empty, but something felt wrong. The air was heavier, like the walls were pressing in. I turned to leave, and froze. The mirror was covered in handprints. Dozens of them, smeared and distorted, as if people had been pushing against the glass from the inside. A low scraping sound echoed from one of the stalls at the far end. I didn't stick around to see what it was. I bolted out the door, nearly tripping over my own feet. When I reached my truck, I locked the doors, heart pounding. I checked my phone. No signal. I turned the ignition, ready to get the hell out of there, but my headlights illuminated something. In the fog, a figure stood at the edge of the rest stop, barely visible in the mist. Too tall, too thin, watching. I didn't wait to see what it was. I floored it, tires screeching as I sped back onto the highway. 20 minutes later, I finally reached a familiar truck stop. I ran inside, breathless, and asked the cashier about the rest area. She frowned. "There's no rest stop on that stretch of I-80, she said. I argued, told her I had just been there. She shook her head. That place shut down over 30 years ago. A trucker was found dead in the restroom. They say he wrote something on the mirror before he died." I swallowed hard. What did he write? She hesitated before answering. "Don't stop." My name is Dean Holloway, and I've been driving long-haul trucks for nearly a decade. Over the years, I've heard my fair share of ghost stories from fellow truckers, but I never put much stock in them. That was until I picked up a hitchhiker on a deserted highway in Texas. It was around 3 a.m., and I was cruising down an empty stretch of road, trying to keep my eyes open. I had another 6 hours before my next stop, and the caffeine was barely keeping me awake. That's when I saw him, a man standing by the side of the road, his thumb out. He looked harmless enough. Just a regular guy in jeans and a flannel shirt, a backpack slung over one shoulder. Normally, I wouldn't stop. I had a rule about picking up strangers, but something about him made me tap the brakes. Maybe it was the fatigue, or maybe I just felt bad for the guy. I pulled over. He climbed in without a word, just nodded at me as he shut the door. "Where you headed?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. "North," he said. His voice was low, almost mechanical. "Well, I'm going up to Amarillo. That work for you?" He didn't respond right away. Then, after a long pause, he nodded. Something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. He was completely still, staring straight ahead. That's when I noticed his hands. They weren't normal. His fingers were too long, the knuckles bending at unnatural angles, and his skin pale, almost translucent under the dim cab light. My stomach twisted. I cleared my throat, trying to shake the unease. "So, been out here long?" "Yes," he said. Another long pause. Too long. I tightened my grip on the wheel. The road stretched endlessly ahead, and suddenly, I regretted picking him up. Then he spoke again. "You shouldn't have stopped." My foot pressed instinctively on the gas. I swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" He finally turned to face me. And that's when I saw his eyes, or rather, the empty sockets where his eyes should have been. My breath caught in my throat. The truck lurched as I yanked the wheel. The rig veered dangerously, tires screeching against the asphalt, and then he was gone. The passenger seat was empty. I slammed the brakes, my chest heaving, hands trembling. My headlights illuminated nothing but the road ahead. For a long moment, I just sat there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Then, slowly, I reached for the passenger side door handle. It was still locked, but the seatbelt was buckled as if someone had just been sitting there. I didn't stop again until I reached Amarillo. The next morning, I mentioned the hitchhiker to a few old-timers at a truck stop. They exchanged uneasy glances before one of them finally spoke. "Son," he said, his voice gravelly, "you just met the Hollow Man. He's been out there for years, and if you pick him up, well, let's just say you were lucky this time. I haven't picked up a hitchhiker since, and I never will again." My name is Ray Carter, and I've been driving trucks for over 15 years. Long hauls, sleepless nights, and endless highways. I've seen it all. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened that night on Route 89. I had picked up a late-night delivery from a warehouse in Nevada, heading towards Montana. The load was standard pallets of canned goods. But the route was anything but ordinary. Route 89 stretched through desolate landscapes, where towns were sparse, and gas stations were mere ghosts in the dark. Around 2:30 a.m., the road was empty except for me and the occasional roadkill illuminated by my high beams. I was making good time when I noticed something strange, a figure standing by the side of the road. At first I thought it was a hitchhiker. The figure was tall and thin, dressed in dark clothing, and wore a wide-brimmed hat that obscured its face. As I passed, my headlights briefly lit its face, or what should have been a face. There was nothing there. No eyes, no mouth, no features at all. Just a smooth, pale surface, like a mannequin left to rot in the desert sun. A chill ran down my spine. My gut told me to keep driving, but my truck's CB radio suddenly crackled to life. "You shouldn't have seen me, Ray." The voice was distorted, like it was coming from a damaged speaker. But I knew I hadn't touched the radio. I slammed on the gas, my heartbeat hammering in my chest. The figure disappeared into the darkness behind me, but something inside me told me I wasn't alone, and I was right. A few miles later, I saw it again, this time standing in the middle of the road. I barely had time to react. Ty jerked the wheel, sending my rig screeching to the side. The trailer nearly jackknifed, but I managed to regain control. Breathing heavily, I checked my mirrors. The figure was now sitting in my passenger seat. I swerved violently, my truck skidding across the asphalt. But when I turned to look, the seat was empty. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in short gasps. And then, the CB radio crackled again. "Keep driving, Ray. You're almost home." I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I floored it all the way to the next truck stop, where I spent the rest of the night, engine running, doors locked. The next morning, I checked my dashcam footage. 2:30 a.m., the camera clearly showed the road ahead, and at the exact moment I saw the figure, the footage glitched out. Just static, Route 89. I never drove it again.